when I asked you what's the craziest use case you've ever heard of. So do you think there'll be a day where you're strolling in your garden and you pick an orange from an orange tree and then you go to the other side of the garden and you pluck an iPhone right off your tree there? Today we have a very special guest for you. Fedor, who is a tech leader and a foremost industry leader right now. It's going to be a good show for everybody. Going to extract a lot of information, a lot of value for everyone tuning in. Fedor, where are you calling us from currently today? I see the A-frame house, which makes me think you're calling me out of Europe.
Yeah, that's actually right. Hey, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for inviting. I'm in Amsterdam, and it's one of the houses under Amsterdam, and it's like my office is on the top floor of a small house. Pretty nice.
I'm super excited to have you on. Thank you for your time. And one of the things I wanted to kind of cover with you is you've worked in some big tech companies, big tech firm, both small and big, my understanding. And right now we're in such an interesting age. I think you're at the tip of the spear, cutting edge technology. And one thing I'm seeing today in the field is there's a lot of hype, almost like the dot-com bubble, about what AI will be, what it will not be. And I think there's not that many people out there really distilling or cutting through the hype and saying what is the real value we're going to be getting out of AI in the next 5 years. And so it's really good to have a tech leader on such as yourself that can kind of you're on the cutting edge. You're seeing things, probably a lot of R&Ds coming across your desk, and super interested to talk to you, man. Thank you for being on.
Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, and the first kind of thing I wanted to get into is just like, before we get into the call, can you level set with just like what your experience is so our listeners can understand who you are, what expertise you're drawing from, and where you're at today, what you're doing, what you're currently working on?
Yeah, sure. So you're right. I mean, it's a really exciting time these days to be in AI, and in older days that was called machine learning. And I've actually been in this field for a while, for about 20 years these days, starting with some face recognition algorithms and whatever was popular at the time. I've been working, I guess, building a lot of different AI products as a tech lead, at some point in theoretical computer science, theoretical machine learning, proving some convergence algorithms, but then built a few features and products for Amazon, Microsoft, AWS. And the last few years I spent focusing on human in the loop and how to ensure that when you apply AI, you do it responsibly and you incorporate humans in the decision making properly, and what is the best way to incorporate humans in decision making when you take machine learning and AI. So this was spent quite a few years on that, and most recently I've actually moved a little more to the infrastructure side and built a platform for software engineers to use large language models through an API.
Awesome. So I guess someone trying to get into the AI game, right? It's a trend. Has a ship already taken off? Like, if you're just going from 0 to 1, let's not even talk about startups. Let's just talk about an individual that wants to start his career, whether that be your own startup company or whether it be working for another big company. Are we too late to the game, or can they get involved in what would be your best just kind of like starting point from that?
No, I think that's actually a great starting point these days to start with. And the reason is this, like previously, it was a really cool, before, basically, in my opinion, there's this tipping point of ChatGPT. And I'm going to explain why I think it's a tipping point. Before that point, AI and ML were kind of a little bit niche. They were popular, cool technologies, but still were quite niche technologies. And these days, it's technology which is very widespread, and it's like getting into a lot around us and getting into our lives on almost an everyday basis. And that, on one hand, can excite a lot of those who are focused on applications and products to join in, learn, and build those things. The technology has been developed to quite a large extent, to a certain extent, but there is way more in front of us, way more ahead of us. And I think if you are excited about applying AI and how to improve people's lives with technologies, it's a great area to get in. If you're excited about building technologies and actually like hardcore, say research or hardcore research and development, it's also a great time because the architecture, even though everybody is using transformers and GPT architectures these days, things are still, constantly evolving. Like the most recent interesting curious of development, in my opinion, inference time compute, right? And that is something that hasn't been there before. That only with the introduction of O1 Preview by OpenAI started gaining, some fair amount of interest. And that's an area of an active research for production research, research and development for potential products, for potential production. And then, of course, there's a whole, huge area of even pure, I'd say, research, which you could do. Listen to Jan Likan, who actually believes that transformers might not be the best architecture to achieve AGI. So, if you are interested in pure research and figuring out how to build really, really smart models, maybe you should do research in non-transformer fields. So I think it's a great time to get in.
Do you think AGI is possible from what you're seeing from from where we are today?
Yeah, see, that's a really tricky question. So the whole concept, the whole idea of the possibility of AGI started appearing in people's minds when they realized there is a scaling laws, right? So what are the scaling laws? The scaling laws is empirical observation. It's not a law of nature. It's an empirical observation. When you pour more compute into these large transformer models and more data, they get smarter. And they get smarter in a somewhat of a linear or almost linear fashion. It's all in log domain, but whatever. And the idea was that if you do get a lot of compute, if you do pour a lot of compute, right, you can get maybe to superhuman performance. And so then everybody started thinking that, hey, AGI is possible. But then there's additional thing here, right? Two, I guess, important components here are, besides compute, are data and knowledge representation. There are some quite a few signals that maybe current data is not enough, not going to be enough. It's like we already exhausted all of the text data that was out there, and the video data or image data don't actually give enough knowledge to the models as much as we want this data to give knowledge. We don't know how to actually get it out of those data types. That seems to be a small limitation, which is slowly people started realizing recently, and maybe it's going to play a big role. Another thing is data representation, right? That's what Jan often talks about, Jan LeCun. And that concern is about the fact that when you try to predict the next word, you might not be able to actually incorporate the concepts of the world, the existing kind of abstractions that humans think about. You don't actually incorporate them properly into the models. And whether that concern is valid or not is a controversial question these days in research. A lot of other very strong researchers say that, well, if you can predict the next word well, then maybe you can build a super powerful model which predicts the next words for the unsolved theorems or for, the unwritten War and Peace novels, right? And so you can actually get to really high performance. It's hard to say. The most recent news, I guess a couple of weeks ago, they're probably about a couple of weeks old, are that OpenAI and Google and some other companies are signaling that somehow the model improvement, the model progress has not been as fast as they wanted it to be. And so there are some signals that, maybe we need to do something more than just add compute. But then if you listen to Sam Altman, he's saying we just need more compute, and there's a lot of interest involved in all of this play, so it's really hard to say, but here are the current data points I can share.
The follow-up question I have is we talked to someone also, who has, I think, deep insights in AI, and he mentioned the more data we have, the more people we'll need. So the idea of all these jobs disappearing is just like a daydream or a pipe dream. What do you think about that?
Well, that's a great answer to that, actually. So if you think about the job disappearing fear, it existed, for more than a century already, right? As soon as you started building factories and automation, people are afraid that their jobs are going to disappear. And some jobs are probably going to disappear. But what they're going to be replaced with is something very likely much more interesting than, or much more exciting, much more rewarding than the jobs that disappear. And to say things like that for people who maybe are on those jobs. But the thing is that we all need to learn new things all the time. And I don't think that these days it's a huge fear that tomorrow all the jobs are going to disappear and then you're not going to be able to do anything. That's not going to happen tomorrow, right? And then in a couple of decades, a lot of jobs are going to disappear. So it's a normal process of technological advancement. Learning new things is something that I guess every one of us has to do all the time too.
Maybe we can start upskilling engineers to yoga instructors startup or something.
That, yeah.
It's a strange world, man. I mean, did you see that? I was reading an article that some idiot, of course he's in Texas, right? Sorry, Texans. He's actually building a Terminator robot. like it looks like the Terminator, and he's embedding AI into it. So it's like, what? People are so crazy, man. Like when you see this type of technology, and I think it's gonna be a very interesting world. I had a question. Where do you see back, kind of referring back to this question? And David, I was actually going to ask that exact same question from Deep in AI. You know, they had that little comment, but I'm interested to know from you if you want to start a use case today as, say, a company, whether it be small, mid-size, uh, large enterprise. Do you think like there's a bunch of, it feels like we're in this era of people just in this gold rush. But if you want to sell the tools to those people that are rushing to that, you know, to AI, the craze, the hype, what is the best use cases do you think in the future are going to win out to be the most profitable? Because I think, like I said, there's a lot of ideas out there. They seem to be very small and niche. But what are the real niche use cases to extract ROI from the market, do you think? And also, too, I know you do a lot of consultation and stuff like that. What are some of the most just like ridiculous ideas in AI you've seen?
Well, I guess let me try to answer the first one. I mean, though it's a tough one to answer. You're asking basically, you know, what's going to be the next great startup with AI, and nobody really knows, right? But the thing is that, like, if you're saying about the profitability, you know, I'm just like taking a specific word, then of course there's always a market for custom solutions, and so those things are usually very profitable, but those are not very scalable. That's why they're custom solutions, right? So what's the right path with scalability and you know, customization? What's a great middle ground? You know, I don't know, it's hard to say. What I do know is that current AI technologies have enabled truly a lot of new things. I mean, everybody knows that automating customer support, you know, helping with code writing, helping actually design code, like building tools with code, like those kind of things, data engineering, data processing, correction of writing, right, or like summarization. Those are the things that really work. Like you can see them working, and you can make a lot of useful tools out of that. And maybe the question of where to start should be answered with a problem that you're experiencing at the moment, right? So not about, like, you know, maybe with the profitability or the growth or what's the next big thing, but what's the real problem that, I don't know, we're experiencing on a daily life, on a daily basis, and how do other people solve that problem now, and whether this is, you know, an efficient solution or not. That's a way to think about starting a new product and building a new product. And the second question you asked is about the craziest thing I saw. Like, you know, there are a lot of, like, most recently I've seen this idea of replicating. That's actually really cool. So replicating personality. So just today, there's a company shares a few millions for their product, which says to replicate your personality after a few interviews and a few like training sessions if you want. And of course, all of us often say that, hey, if I could only clone myself, I'd achieve so much more. Right? So like it really answers to the pain. But whether it's possible really to do that or not is is a really hard thing to say. Surprising to me, again today, I saw that there was a DeepMind research which also did, you know, like actually worked on that same direction, where after basically a couple of hours of interviews, the AI was able to somehow replicate the ethical values of whoever is interviewing. And I mean, one needs to really read the papers and figure out the limitations there and whether it's possible or not. But I think that's actually pretty crazy at the current stage. And whether it's possible, I'm a little doubtful. But then it's all about the product. Like it's all about what kind of side of the personality do you really replace? Do you really clone? Like, can you really properly simulate one part? And then, yeah, if you simulate the right part, maybe you simulate the interview giving, or maybe you simulate, you know, the sales calls. And bingo, like you really have a great product.
If that tool hallucinates at all, they're gonna have to change their name to schizophrenic AI.
That too, yeah. That was going to be quite something.
One thing I want to ask as a follow-up to all these things is, like, you know, 2025 is coming, right? Quick and hot. Years coming in, it went by super quick, and you know, since I think March, you know, I got to see part of the AutoGen rollout with AI agents, right? So I was fortunate enough to be part of that R&D project, and I've been like in my company, right? I've been pushing. This is the future, and at the time, it could only produce like a snake game, you know. But we go from this March, you know, till now. Like that time frame is very short, and seeing what like agentic mesh or agent swarms can produce today is fantastic. And I don't know if you guys saw that article about Project and Autogen. They were asking it to write some code, right? And the AI agent decided to go off to the internet and actually, it was writing code. It was doing a really good job. But it started going off to the internet. I was looking at like pictures of national parks, and everybody was asking, what is it doing? Like, there's nothing in the instructions to kind of say like,
Yeah.
or discover why that actually happened. And when you think about like, I feel like everybody's going to be rolling this out in 2025. Do you see the same thing? Do you think that's going to change the landscape of the internet? Is that going to change the landscape of how companies operate? Or do you think that it's going to actually produce a lot of havoc, right? Like you saw Claude, right? Claude, they rolled out their computer use where that agent can actually look at your screen and take screenshots of the screen and figure out how to take actions that you've given it. So you got to actually put it in a Docker because it could end up like going to your file structure, messing it up, right? It can produce havoc. So what's your whole take on that? I would say next hot trend, hot take.
Yeah, look, this is a great question. Actually, I think that it's worth sort of diving a little bit into this agent thing, right? So everybody's excited these days about agents, but then you think about what are the agents? Like, why, what's the difference between agents and LLMs or ChatGPT, which was released, a few years ago already these days, right? And the key differences, at least I see, are that you basically narrow the way you apply that LLM, you narrow it to a specific task type, let's say, computer use, or let's say browsing, right? And you give that LLM the ability, or you force it to answer in a certain way that is equivalent to browsing, and then you connect that task with some other tasks. Let's maybe make a conclusion from whatever you browsed. But that's again, like you take an LLM and you force it to, summarize the text that you found, the web page that you found, in some sort of a different form, right? And so, like, it really doesn't actually require you to make those applications. It doesn't require you to have a technological revolution in LLM architectures, or in the way LLMs are trained. So these are like quite incremental steps on top of just like basic key essence technology here, which is the LLM, which is like a large language model, which is trained to predict word by word, and then aligned to be able to answer human understandable instructions, right? So these are the two things that were like why ChatGPT was so popular, and now all of these things seem to me a little incremental, and I'm really happy about that, because I think that that's what the technology enables to do, and I think that the agent and the agent ecosystem is something that is really exciting to see. The development of those things, it was really, really exciting to see, because in my opinion, it's like this, it's like this flower which grows from a small root, and the root doesn't actually change much. So I would not say that the current agents is a different technology than that was before. It's just the way of that technology is getting applied, and there's going to be many more ways. And I do think that narrowing the way you use a specific model in a specific context is going to enable you to build reliable applications for a million different things. And I think the agent platforms and just specific types of agents is something that people are going to use.
Do you think in the next 6 months I'll be able to create an agent called co-founder and then replace David?
Well, you need to clone him first, and then pay him royalty. That's what's probably going to happen. That's actually a cool question. You know what about what? It's a cool question about the economics of this, right?
Well, it's also the conversation. It's a conversation, right? Like if I want to have a conversation that's at that founder level, and I want that feedback coming back and forth. What are the next steps? What should we be planning for this year? How should we operationalize an operation? That's the type of conversation I want to get to. And if you could help me, Fedor, we'll just next call. David's going to be gone. He's going to be out of the conversation, and we'll have our co-founder here.
An AI co-founder, yeah, that's an interesting direction.
Oh man, I feel like people are gonna start replacing their wives and husbands and stuff.
Well, I don't know if you've seen, but there was a recent photo shoot of Kim Kardashian with Tesla robots. So
Yeah, I think it's possible. I think that's where we're headed. But yeah, so what do you think? I guess I didn't mean to interrupt the question.
no, but my point is this, right? Like I think that there might be some economic change, right, for the creators' economy, right? So why is it like that? Because these days, it's easier than before, much easier than before, to take somebody's works and clone the style and then reproduce that style and actually produce something, in that sort of a style. So then the question is, should the creator, the original creator of the style, be somehow rewarded for that? And that's always been the question. But previously, you couldn't do it you couldn't clone the style, at such a large scale as now. So there might be a need to change the economy in a way that rewards the creators, and that comes back to open source code writers, like writers of open source packages, those who release open source models, like people write pieces, write interesting pieces of analytics online, so those sort of things. So I think that's an important question. So if you want to replace David, we got to figure out what's the way to reward him post factum.
No, but I personally think a day is coming where 2 years, 3 years down the road, like instead of me showing up to a conference, right, you might have my digital twin, right? And I also think this idea of this digital twin getting compensated, which ultimately would be me. I do think I asked you a question. This kind of answers it. I do think that that's kind of an infrastructure that would be a basis of a lot of money. It's almost like the bank of AI, right? Where you're loaning out an asset to people, right? And you can make money on and stuff like that. But also something that I think is super, super tricky. Like I've heard like people say, we're going to come into an era where your eyes will deceive themselves. Your ears are going to deceive themselves. And maybe even your own soul is going to deceive itself. And then you see you see Sam Altman coming out with Orb Coin, and it's like he's got some weird device that you got to like authenticate yourself. So like people aren't going to know what's truth, what's reality, what's fake, what's real. And so truth is being an agent of truth and dealing in the truth in terms of technology is going to be interesting. And I think there's a good use case there for anybody to go grab in our community. But also too, it's like community is going to be huge, right? Because as more of our digital twins and technology takes over our jobs, and I do think that's a reality, I think the community becomes vastly more important. What are your thoughts there? And then like, do you see, am I like way out in left field? Am I swimming in the ocean now, or do you see that as a reality?
No, I actually think that what the trends I see these days about the community and about the cloning of certain styles or just responding or acting on the internet. The trends in those areas I see are that people seem to start leaning towards some sort of digital signature requirement, right? Where basically, like, you always know who wrote that particular piece, or who produced that particular piece, or maybe whose AI is produced that particular piece, but you have to know that it's AI and not human. And I actually, like myself, believe in the future that if we want to keep ourselves sane and if we want to keep our, I guess, internet and just the digital space, if we want to keep that space healthy and useful and not separating the societies, but rather bringing them together, I think it's really, really important to have some sort of to track somehow the source of a particular comment, of a particular image. And by no means I'm proposing that the commenters should always be only humans. Not at all. But if you are able to say, okay, well, hey, here's a writing which says, yeah, this is clear in AI writing, and the AI belongs to that specific person, company, whatever, it brings a lot of transparency. It brings a lot of sincerity, which can be lost if we don't do that. That's what, in my opinion, is important. And coming back to the community point, I think that the communities, therefore, of like the communities of real people communicating with each other is going to be more important than before. The real connection, the real conversations between people are going to be more important than before. It's possible there's going to be some sort of communities of AIs, but then everybody needs to understand that that's a community of AI. Everybody has to understand its purpose, and that's all great. Like if we're kind of mostly aligned on what the purpose of that community is, why AIs are there, what are they doing there, well, then that's great. But yeah, the dangerous path is when we're lost between whether this is a real person or not, and then we're lost between whether this is reality or artificial reality.
I think you just dropped a huge opportunity, but I'm curious, like, is there people doing these digital signatures? I mean, it sounds like almost like a social security number, like you must have it in the near future. I mean, like, do you see any companies do this or?
Yeah, there's a trend, right? Like, so OpenAI, a few, I think, weeks or even months ago, released a tool for detecting.
They called it Orb.
Sorry?
And it's something called WorldCoin.
Yeah. Oh.
Yeah.
Okay. I guess that's what it is. But yeah, they released a tool for detecting whether something was written by AI, and then there was a few papers, and now the tools and startups who are claiming to detect specific AI models. But what I'm talking about is not an approximate detection. What I'm talking about is some sort of a more of a regulatory step where it's hard to make a mess from a specific place by just plugging in AIs, or maybe you mixed a couple of models and now you're not detectable, right? So it's we probably shouldn't be able to do this unless for specific communities, specific areas, specific places. Some places should be anonymous. Some communities should be anonymous. Some topics should be anonymous. But then, yeah, there should be a distinction, in my opinion.
So you're sitting with the Jedi of bureaucracy and legislation in Europe, right? Like you guys are on the forefront of legislation. So you probably know more than us too. Like I'm pretty, like I work for a European company, right? SAP. But so I know there's a lot of, I think the Europeans are on the forefront of, AI legislation. Do you think there's like on this whole topic, do you think that there's money to be made for companies to start like implementing that type of technology and really focusing on it? Or is it just, something right now that's like sustainability, right? Like, I'm a nicotine company and I am saving the carbon footprint of X, Y, and Z. It's like, come on, man, really? Like, really? That's your, no. So is it just hearsay, a means to like the banking to get more loans?
Well, look, I actually believe that there's a money made in that area the same way there is money made in other regulatory areas. Like if you're talking about the carbon footprint, I mean, there's a lot of money in that economy, right? And the reason is because regulation, forces, originally regulation forces that economy to exist, and then it becomes more profitable for businesses to follow the greener path. And I think there's going to be the same trend with AI. But what I do think also is that unless that regulatory thing exists, there's not going to be a lot of money to be made there, right? Because like the money start being made only at the moment when the company thinks they might become liable for the technologies they provide, for the technologies they create, and when they start thinking, okay, they might get sued or they might become somehow liable otherwise in a different manner. They start thinking about how to implement it. And if you are a professional in how to implement it, how to do, well, now these days it's called responsible AI, whatever. There's other names here as well. If you are a professional in that, I'm pretty sure that's an area of useful application. But that also depends on where you're located. Like EU is known for its strong regulations and sometimes maybe overly strong regulations. US actually was the first to introduce some regulations on AI, but they were not nearly as strong as the EU ones. And there are different countries, decide for themselves in a different way how much they want to go into that area. And I think that's there's an opportunity to follow that regulation wording and those regulation rules and help companies get through them in an easier way.
Oh, wild. I'm getting so many ideas, like, insurance plans for your digital clones, like there's so many ways. Tell me this, like, how far are we from going into doctor's office or a lawyer's office, talking to a robot instead of a human and getting better answers than a human lawyer? Like, do you think we're 5 years, 10 years away, or it's just like not possible? Just like, for the record, I heard something from like an insider that said, like AI hallucinates, blah, blah, blah. Someone said that, but then someone on the inside said, well, it hallucinates, but actually doctors, like if you look at the record, doctors make more mistakes than AI.
That was the most recent, more recent news. Yeah, look, so my opinion is this. I think that as with any technology, the adoption is not going to be straightforward and immediate, but like the possibility to enhance the lawyer's job or the doctor's job with AI is there today. And I'm pretty sure that for those who are willing to adopt, for those professionals in law or in healthcare who are willing to adopt AI tech, I don't want to give strong predictions. I think in a year or two, we're going to see much more adoption in those fields of different AI, large language models. If you're asking about the full replacement of, a lawyer or a doctor, I don't know if that's really needed at this point. I think like the way it's probably going to work is that you're going to replace answering some very simple questions or replace, helping in some simple way, and then falling back in a little more complex way and then more complex questions to the professional. That's one way. Another way is that the lawyer or the doctor always gives you the advice, but most of this advice is maybe generated with AI, and then they're like tweaking it and then saying like how to actually pass this to you in a better way. And it could be totally, fully the same thoughts that AI generated, but the doctor's going to be checking them, or the lawyers are going to be verifying that. And it's going to speed up their work, but that's not going to be full replaced. I think that we'll soon see lawyers and doctors using AI too.
What would you say, I don't know, three or so industries where like AI use case is prime, like it's like whether there's lawyers, doctors, or I don't know, just like software engineers, or like coding or whatever, versus like three things where like AI just does not apply, but you see people trying to make it work for something. Like, where does it work and where does it not work?
So in terms of industries where it works, I mean, it's clearly customer support. Like, customer support is an area everybody knows that AI can help a lot these days, and it does. You can see a lot of companies applying AI there. Now there is coding and software engineering, especially for data processing or data engineering, or basically all sorts of different data access automation tools, but also for actually writing code or starting to write code. We started with copilots where junior engineers got help from AIs to actually how to get started. And now these days, the companies are moving, in my opinion, more towards helping the senior engineers actually design code or build pieces together or improve the whole packages. So these are the areas where value being generated right now. There's a lot of technical development in image generation and video generation. It's hard for me to say how far this technical development is from getting incredibly wide adoption. There's clearly some use cases where it's applied, but I might not have enough visibility with some sort of viral trends of adoption of those. But from my perspective, I don't see like a huge adoption of those tech things right now. Where it doesn't work yet, there's another thing, right? Another very important topic about these LLMs that people expect to be done, but it's not really done, is planning. And what this really is like solving, splitting a complex problem into parts and executing every one of those parts confidently with very little chance of error. That doesn't really happen these days with LLMs, and that's what I talked about in the beginning of this call. There are some models like O1 Preview and now it's DeepSeek, which approach planning for math and for computer science, especially, but for other areas as well, but especially for math and computer science, approach it in a way that gets us a feeling that maybe planning is going to be solved or at least very much facilitated with LLMs. But then we do have to think about math and computer science as the areas where planning is much easier to do because you have easy verifications at every step, right? The reason why it might work for math is because you can have a verifier for every step for math, or like you can write a test for every step of your code change, and therefore you can actually build a tech which plans. Whereas for the less precise topics, right, for politics or just anything that's creative topics like writing, or just solving things in life, there is very few a situation where you can track whether the answer is correct at every step of the way, and so that's why planning is hard, and so planning is not really well done these days with LLMs.
I couldn't agree more. It's I think talking about this agent swarm idea, right? I think if you connect it to a workflow, right? It's not just pure LLM agent swarms, but it's tied to workflows and stuff like that. I think the biggest value add to enterprise businesses and businesses in general is the knowledge worker. And when I say knowledge worker, I'm also including the planning functionality, right? And if you can think through, if you have somebody who's really good, and I think this is kind of the employee of the future, is somebody that's a data engineer and they understand like workflow and automation work, and then also prompt engineering, and maybe a little bit of elements of like, job descriptions. And, I think you really can get to some interesting solving of problems. Mm-hmm. I do think that's the wave of the future. I mean, I came into the call and I wanted to know what your thoughts were, and then to me, you just boom, explosion. Like you highlighted it for me. Like that's what I'm starting to hear everywhere. In fact, I was on a big conference by ML Ops, and they were talking about, a couple companies were mentioning that, right? Like that's the real gold, is these knowledge worker agents that interact with different types of job functions, other agents, stuff like that. But also, we know the more you have AI interacting with AI, right? You get things like where they're looking at pictures of national parks, or I don't know, stopping to look at and nobody knows why it happens. Let me ask you, man. I know we're coming up on time for you, Fedor.
Yeah, that's right. I gotta
Last question before we close this out. Sure. Do you think we'll ever get to the day, a day? And I'm asking this because I do have a deep knowledge on R&D on bio nanotechnology and AI, the work that's being done there. That's when I asked you what's the craziest use case you've ever heard of. So do you think there'll be a day where you're strolling in your garden and you pick an orange from an orange tree, and then you go to the other side of the garden and you pluck an iPhone right off your tree there?
No, well, an iPhone tree is it's a cool question. We're gonna do a lot of advancement in biology for this. The way I translate your question is basically like, when are we going to be able to have to grow biological technologies? And so I'm not that good in the biology field, but I don't see that. Yeah. I don't see signs of those in front of me, so it's hard for me to say that it's going to be soon.
It's always a fun question to ask people, man. It's super good to have you, man. Super good to meet you, and looking forward to the future. Cheers to everybody on the call.
Thanks a lot, and have a great day.
I learned a lot, Fedor. Thanks for coming by. I think we need to do a couple of more of these calls just to figure out where the world is going. Thank you.
Right, bye.
Bye-bye.